Hello. Thanks for listening in on this panel. Before we get into any content, I always like to have these five great panelists just quickly introduce themselves and the project they're here to represent. So, Evgeny, maybe you want to start.
Hi everyone, Evgeny, co-founder of Fluence, together with Tom. And we are building a decentralized compute platform, which Tom already mentioned a few times. So not gonna talk more about it.
All right, Stefaan, CEO of Akave. We are a data layer. We help customers, businesses, and DePIN networks to bring their off-chain data sets on-chain.
I'm Jarrod Barnes. I'm our head of founder success and developer engagement at Near. My team and I build all of our developer tooling, work with a large number of DePIN projects really at the intersection of AI and Web3.
Jeff Amico, I'm the chief operating officer at Gensyn. We are a machine learning compute network. We connect together any device in the world that's capable of training or running inference on a machine learning model, aggregate it, and make it available to developers and researchers who want to train ultra-high scale models. Excited to chat more with you guys today.
Fantastic. My name is Sebastian. I'm part of the team of Impossible Cloud Network. My voice is not the best, but we have this great microphone, so I'm sure you can hear me. So maybe setting the scene here a bit in terms of the intersection of DePIN AI, right? So if we think about the current traditional cloud that there is, I think we can all agree that it more or less works and what it's supposed to do. AWS, for instance, announced that they will invest $100 billion this year in capital expenditure. So that's quite a lot of money. And still at the same time, they also said that with all this investment, they won't be able to keep up with demand, right? In comes DePIN, potentially. So maybe turning here the first question to the participants, Evgeny, maybe starting with you. What are some of the unique advantages that DePIN can bring to traditional cloud and how can contribute to solving the AI demand problem?
You want to start from me? Sure, yeah. I used to say that DePIN is a fancy new term for sharing economy, right? So we had 10 years ago, we had this Uber 4X, Airbnb 4X. Now we have all these DePIN projects who essentially do marketplaces of like crowdsourcing of resources and then packaging it to products and providing as a products to customers. So if you think of about AI, the most obvious example is, okay, let's take GPUs, aggregate them and provide it as a computing power to train AI models. And like first generation of DePIN AI projects essentially, started doing this. But then there's like a much more use cases actually. There's a use cases like on data collection where you crowdsource data labeling, cross-validation, and so on and so forth. So like preparation data for AI through these crowdsourced networks, and all kind of stuff related AI agents. And there's a bunch of examples here. I think one of the most important aspects here versus traditional centralized crowdsourcing platforms or marketplaces is that DePIN means crypto. It means on-chain. So if you're on-chain, you can redistribute value back to contributors of that contributed their resources or labor or anything into this network.
Makes sense, Stefaan. What's your perspective from a data layer perspective? What can DePIN contribute?
Yeah, I think so. I totally agree with what you're saying. So we're seeing like in DePIN like two different segments. I mean, there's probably more, like you mentioned, the aggregators that are aggregating very unique data sets because AI has a data problem. Meaning there's not enough data to train or publicly accessible to train LLMs to the next level, right? And so the challenge really is like the real rich data sets are either not collected yet or they are being collected by these new DePIN networks now, which is amazing. Or two, they're sitting behind firewalls. And so customers don't trust yet or are very, reluctant or, to share these data sets in a secure way. And what is making the move for some of these customers that we're seeing to decentralized networks or decentralized infrastructure, specifically storage, is cost, right? So their first step is like, hey, I've got a very fixed budget. I need to run AI workloads because I need to stay competitive and my board and my investors are pushing me. And also I really want to do it because I have these unique data sets. But I have limited budget. And so what we're seeing is some of these applications or users moving some of these data sets out of the centralized clouds so they can take more advantage of H100s like that are available in some of these compute farms. And, they have a lot more flexibility then. And so I think here's where DePIN on the infrastructure side comes into play and really can help these users to see the value initially through a cost benefit, and then second, through the programmability, mutability, all the unique primitives that blockchain offers.
Jarrod, your perspective from near, what does decentralized infrastructure offer in terms of the intersection with AI?
Yeah, I can share more from a developer perspective, right? Myself and my team, we solely focus on developer tooling. And a lot of things, two key themes that are happening. Number one, consumer hardware is getting really good for local computation. If anyone here has a MacBook, I just bought a MacBook M4 Max. You can run really performant models locally. I have kind of a mini compute cluster in my house, M2 Ultra and my M4 Max. For any hardware nerds out there, that's pretty powerful, right? And the biggest thing we see, particularly from crypto native developers, is a lot of times you don't actually know how much compute that you need. So we actually spend a fair amount of time trying to consult folks and say, what is the workload that you're actually trying to do? Could you actually do that locally just with some memory optimizations? Or if you do actually need some type of compute and orchestration across devices, what are the devices you actually need, right? That's where we actually spend a lot of time thinking about and working with our partners to better educate everyday people who are starting to explore more advanced AI workflows. I think, we're in more of a direct to developer lens rather than a B2B lens. So a little bit different than maybe some of the other panelists here, but I think that's kind of trend number one. And then trend number two is because of that, right? Where DePIN really comes in is the opportunity for heterogeneous heterogeneous devices, in that if you don't need a cluster of A100s, right, you could use a variety of different devices, right, that are orchestrated across a framework, which in simple, plain English terms is you can basically scale up and scale down based on what you need, rather than trying to be locked into an AWS EC2 instance, which is really, really helpful if you're just trying to engage everyday developers, right? So that's a little bit different angle, right, for us as a kind of layer one blockchain meeting developers where they're at than B2B. But I hope that gives a little bit of context to the question.
Jeffrey, your thoughts?
I don't think I would have a lot to add to that. That was a great kind of landscape view. I would just say that for us, we think that decentralized networks like this actually allow you to train new types of models that weren't possible before. And so, people contributing unique data, kind of decentralized model architectures, things like that are only really possible when you aggregate together devices that are distributed across geographies and across different clouds. So for us, that's where a lot of our focus is, and not necessarily just the kind of price and the scale component, although those are important, but also in unlocking new types of models that will push the frontier of machine learning forward.
And if we flip this around now, we've talked a lot about the advantages, scalability, the heterogeneity. What about some of the technical challenges that we see? Maybe, Jeffrey, starting with you.
It really depends, what type of model you're looking to train. So for the large majority of the way that we kind of train models today, they are, what you think of as, say like a GPT-4 or, that kind of style. They're dense transformer models, which means that to train them, you need to effectively have all of the different devices that are participating in the training and communicating with one another really, really frequently and really, really rapidly throughout the process. That's a very challenging style of training for decentralized networks, because the nodes in a network like, Gensyn, for example, are going to be distributed. And so that means that you're going to, have a fairly slow and expensive training run if you're looking to train that type of model. So what that means is a network like ours, we don't necessarily think about those type of models as being a very good fit. There are, however, a new class of models that, fit more into the mixture of expert style architecture that are much better suited for the kind of underlying topology of these networks. And so in that case, you aren't quite as bandwidth constrained, which is to say you don't care as much about the communication latency between the devices, because a lot of the training can happen locally on the different nodes. And they only share updates at some infrequent interval. And in that world, you have these kind of very rich diverse mixture of expert style models that can live, in a sense, fragmented across the different devices that they are hosted on. And you effectively have a router that will sit on top of this overall architecture and route a given query through the model architecture in the best way given where the experts sit, what they're good at, and so forth. So we're really excited to see those type of new models get unlocked with this type of underlying infrastructure.
That's very interesting. Maybe Jarrod, from your perspective, you brought in the developer perspective, meaning you can do a lot of things now with the personalized hardware. What are some of the challenges that maybe larger from a network perspective come in when we think about decentralized infrastructure? So what role do latency or performance requirements play in this?
Building on everything Jeffrey just shared, right? GPU communication is still a really hard problem to solve. And there are a lot of folks, Gensyn, one of them, who are solving this in really compelling ways. And I think, for us at Near, that is something that is high priority on our roadmap as we think about the future of distributed devices and essentially distributed computation, of what is our role in that, whether that is perhaps a bit more upstream on the data side and ensuring that there's high quality data, or if it's actually a little bit more downstream on just the orchestration and kind of communication protocol. For us, our center and focus is more on agents and agent communication, but at the end of the day, it's still fundamentally is reliant on the quality of the base model. And so for us, it's important to spend a lot of time thinking about this. Again, less directly immediately on our roadmap to solve for, and more supporting the broader ecosystem. But the bottleneck that we have really seen in trying to best figure out at least our role in amplifying is still GPU communication.
Stefan, your thoughts on the challenges in terms of your data availability, data error?
Yeah. So there's a few. What we're seeing with like some of the DePIN networks that are collecting data sets at the edge is, how do you ensure that end-to-end data provenance is guaranteed? It's really hard, right? A lot of users start with IPFS, which is a great solution, but it's not necessarily their bread and butter. They're not focused on that because they're building the edge device, they're building their marketplace, they're building their community, and so storage is sort of like an afterthought, or a data layer is sort of the afterthought. And so making sure that the DePIN device has the controls and the data is sort of mapped on chain from where it gets collected all the way to the marketplace is super important. That's one. And two is once it's listed in the marketplace, or once you have it brought on chain, how can you help monetize these data owners or these DePIN devices or these DePIN networks in a very transparent way? And this is where there's new smart contracts that you can build smart contracts to enforce access control, and making sure that those users that own those data sets can easily set credentials and share those data sets with potential buyers. So that's still it's still a problem today and a challenge, because it requires a lot of expertise in that space. And plus, it's not something a lot of these networks or even enterprises think about, because they're thinking about their business and they want to monetize their data sets, but for that they need sort of like easy primitives. And on top of that, the second part is, once you start talking to actual enterprises that have existing private data sets, for them, the hardest part is the interoperability. How can I easily move data sets or use my existing applications and point them to a decentralized network? And that's where they're typically coming to us and asking for object or S3 compatible interfaces, because that's what they know today.
Your perspective from the compute side, Evgeny?
Yeah, I think a lot of things already mentioned. I actually wanted to highlight another one on the interoperability. Like it's a kind of higher level. It's probably less technical and more conceptual on communication of agents and interactions between agents. Like, how do we actually do it? Should they use natural language to talk? Is it efficient? We saw probably like this recent video on Twitter where two agents start talking to each other using voice and human language, and then they suggest to switch to the I don't know how to say, like a signals, like a sound format, when they just send each other for efficiency to make it quicker, to make a quick communication over the voice line. And that's like insane. That's just super cool how they just did it. But then there's also actually a bunch of different sort of frameworks or standards being proposed right now, how these agents should talk to each other. Because like you can get them running, like you have some AI model is run, it's like a wrap it into some agent, but then we see that a lot of value is created in connecting these agents into sort of sequences of actions or like pipelines. So that's why this communication is super important.
Now that we've talked about these challenges, I would like to highlight one aspect as well, because if this AI demand keeps growing, there might be the challenge of this being restricted somehow if the supply is not fully there. So maybe, Evgeny, your perspective on what do you think in terms of the price point, meaning democratizing access to these AI models? What role does DePIN play here?
Sorry, so again, in pricing or?
Yeah, so generally, I think we can agree that DePIN infrastructure, having this decentralized way, it brings a lot of advantages. We raised a few, right? But if we have now all of this AI demand and we have supply restricted, right? What do you think the role of DePIN will be in democratizing access to these AI use cases?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obvious answer is that if we bring in more hardware, if we crowdsource in more hardware, everything becomes cheaper, everything becomes actually much more available. In some particular models, if you design the economic model the right way, people may rent compute from someone else to run AI model to do some job for free, right? If you're using crypto, things are possible because you kind of can set up the system where I get this for free, but I contribute somewhere else, or there is some token subsidies involved that sort of push the price down significantly. Like in our case, we just provide compute infrastructure. It can be used for anything, for AI and not for AI. But the token economics model that we have essentially create incentives to push the price down as much as possible. So it makes the compute that you need much more affordable, which unlocks a lot of new use cases, a lot of new customers from from more countries and so on and so forth. So like obviously we bring in more compute, more diverse compute. If we efficiently connect it and if we efficiently package it into products, we can give much lower price to customer, and then we have more and more people benefiting from it.
And I think that opens up a very interesting point, which is maybe starting with you, Stefan. How does DePIN and the advantages that it brings actually impact AI use cases going forward, right? So along all of these advantages, will there be any direct impact on the direct AI use cases that will be out there?
Yeah. What we're seeing is that if you go back to, I previously worked for Western Digital, one of the largest disk manufacturers, right? And so you would see that every year and a half, they would improve density by 10-15%. And so what we're seeing here is that the growth of storage, the growth of data generation is like 30% year over year. And that was like, before this new AI boost, actually it was like 24 or something. But my point is, there's so much more data being generated that cannot be stored. Right now, with DePIN networks, we can actually not just offer more capacity, but it becomes more valuable because you have this networking effect, right? And the networking effect is that you can monetize it, you can make it programmable, and programmable is a big word, but it comes down to like you can actually monetize it, you can share it in a more efficient way. And so what we're hearing now is from some of the DePIN networks as well is like that are collecting data sets is like, hey, we collect this data set for a specific vertical, but we believe that there's other markets out there that are interested in this data. Can you help us in selling that? And even though it's a forward-looking one, right? It's not there today because everyone's still building. But the point is, we know already that AI has a data problem. So we know that once this can be unlocked, there's a lot more potential in how to monetize the actual data sets outside of the DePIN vertical. And so that's where I'm excited about. And I think this is where the networking effects will start to kick in.
Makes a lot of sense. Maybe Jarrod, Jeffrey, your perspective.
I'll be conscious of time and be brief here. I think zooming out, at a 10,000 foot view, DePIN is a story of empowerment, right? All of these use cases that, we're talking about, we are enabling both everyday individuals and organizations to choose their path, right? Centralized AI, while there are negatives to it, right? The stance that I do appreciate is OpenAI sells intelligence, right? What they're kind of marketing with GPT-5 coming out, that's the sale of intelligence, and that's essentially the value that they're deploying. DePIN in the story of empowerment allows you to choose how that intelligence is produced, right? Rather than being a just pure consumer, you actually have optionality, right? In what that looks like. And it's really the power of choice. And that ultimately is kind of the vision that we rally around at NEAR, and the opportunity that we see here. Zooming in at a 1,000 foot view, that story of empowerment, that story of choice becomes really important when you're talking about high value data sets, when you're talking about things that ultimately impact a lot of people in ripple effects in ways, whether that's healthcare, whether that's the legal system. For myself personally, very much am invested in bias and how that's curated in data sets, right? And so all of these DePIN use cases, and I'm providing more of a philosophical response here, are a story of empowerment and enablement for people to meaningfully choose that path. And this is the technology and infrastructure that can really drive that. So more of a philosophical answer, but hope that answers the question.
It's really about lowering the barriers to entry. I think right now, functionally speaking, there's about 4 or 5 companies that have the resources today to actually build frontier machine learning models. There's not been, to my knowledge, a prior era of computing or technology that's been as concentrated as this. If we don't fix it, it'll only continue to concentrate further and further around these companies that have access to compute and access to proprietary data. And so that is fundamentally what the mission is to provide the resources that allow more people to build models, more people to experiment with different types of ideas, different types of architectures, to make this more like the web in the 90s, where anyone could create a website instead of 2 or 3 companies. So that's what I think the key mission is.
One question we definitely can't ignore when we talk about intelligent infrastructure, especially in this space, is what is the role of DePIN and what kind of what can it solve in terms of security, transparency, and trustworthiness? Maybe you could start, Jeffrey.
I think it's pretty similar to the benefits of blockchains in general, right? They provide an underlying substrate that is transparent, it's trustless, it is programmatic, so you can hook it into different types of applications. It's interoperable, and so if you're building a network on top of an underlying layer like that, you get all of those benefits, and that gives the participants in that network the assurance that they're getting paid for the compute that they supplied. They're getting the task that they paid for, and it's verified, and so forth. So I kind of think about it in the same way I think about the benefits that blockchain brings to other contexts, DeFi and other things like that as well.
And if we think of the overlap with AI, what advantages can it bring here? Maybe, Jarrod?
Maybe forecasting a bit into the future. One of the things that we're really excited about is if we assume consumer and localized hardware gets better, and the way we can orchestrate the communication across that hardware gets better, the opportunity really for intelligent routing from a compute standpoint, we think can be really, really powerful. One of the primitives that NEAR as a blockchain is built upon is the idea of dynamic sharding. In other words, our chain expands and contracts based on the amount of transaction volume that exists. We also believe that might be possible in the world of essentially DePIN and the intersection of AI, specifically when it comes to compute and the ability to have essentially intelligent routing and expansion and compression based off of the use case. So it's like pretty deep tech, and it can be a little boring, but that matters when you're an enterprise and you're curious about why would I engage with a kind of distributed or decentralized option? Why is this better than me just quickly plugging into Amazon? I think the biggest thing fundamentally, if I could just share one thing that I hope you take away, is that, we're thinking about things that can enable us to reach feature parity with existing enterprise and consumer facing solutions, to not just have a good enough solution, but a better solution. And that's ultimately what we believe can be the unlock. Going to take a lot of work to get there, but that's something we spend a lot of time thinking about.
Second to last question, because I realize we're running out of time here. Maybe Stefan and Evgeny, what do you think in terms of when you see demand for the infrastructure that you give, right? What are some of the industries that stand to benefit the most with a scaling DePIN infrastructure?
So if you look at the traditional enterprises, so we've talked to a few, we're talking to multiple now. And so one of the biggest challenges they're dealing with is cost when they actually want to use their data that's stored in the cloud. That's one. Two, which is very interesting. Like if you look at what blockchain can do is we can consolidate a database that controls who has access to our data with the actual data layer itself. And so when you talk to some of these enterprises, one of their biggest challenges is that they have a database that provides access controls to who has access to the actual data sets. And then it becomes a fight of like who's running the database, who is the one that is paying for the database, right? So you have this like very convoluted configuration, which is sort of built on traditional architectures, but it comes down to there's some level of dispute, there's some level of political control challenge, and so if you bring that all on chain, there's no dispute anymore because there's no debate. Everything is on chain, and so the customers we're talking to are the most excited, the ones that are traditional. And obviously, they all want to save costs, hands down. But where they get excited about is that they can provide that transparency across different business units. And so this is where the opportunity lies in the future. And then you can start doing lots of stuff with smart contracts, but, traditional customers. So typically, it's customers that are dealing with large data sets that want to run new compute workloads and are dealing with very complex infrastructure environments.
Yeah, I would add to it. I mean, all this true. I would add the security point is actually, it's interesting that when we create a decentralized networks of, computer storage capacity, we start thinking more carefully about security because now sort of you running, like you're sending your data or you're running some workload on some random person machine or some random organization machine. So you want to be more kind of sure that, they not see your data or there's certain limitations for them to do anything with it. And they also want to be sure that whatever being sent to them from the external world doesn't break their hardware, right? Or like doesn't exploit their hardware. So we start thinking of how we make it secure. So that's why a lot of DePIN networks by default enable TEs, for example. There is a lot of discussions about, data not leaving the device and like sending model to data and so on and so forth. So I think that's actually a good benefit that kind of comes, the security benefit kind of comes with most of DePIN solutions just by design, just because it's crowdsourced.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Maybe we can have half a minute more because this one is usually the most interesting for the audience as a wrap up. Where are we at the end of the year and where are we in 3 to 5 years from now? Evgeny, do you want to start?
25 years from now?
35.
No, 3 to 5 years from now.
Oh, 2 to 5.
We could also do 25. Why not? Just
25, I want to be retired.
All right. So okay, I'll tell you one thing that I want to see. Which I think we're going to see by the end of this year, but maybe a little later. So I want to have AI agents that are self-replicate themselves and rehost themselves across different network solutions, hosting providers, clouds, and so on. So they really become autonomous and self-sovereign. That's going to be really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see smart agents like running governance for DAOs because everyone hates governance. And so I hope that problem gets solved with smart agents.
Would love to see a large frontier grade model that is trained on fully distributed hardware.
Amen to that. I would just maybe close with similar to what I said earlier. I think the future will look much more modular in the way that models are created and hosted and deployed. It won't be just, single data centers building the biggest model they can. Models will be sharded across devices with local data being contributed, and they will live across these decentralized networks in the future.
Fantastic. Then with these positive words, I think we can close it. Thank you so much for the panelists for being on stage. Great thoughts. And maybe we can move on with the next one.